As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who was born blind. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus said, neither this man nor his parents sinned. But in order that the works of God might be seen in him, we must work the works of the one who sent me while it is day, because nighttime comes when no one can work. As long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. Now, having said these things, Jesus spat on the ground and he made some mud out of the saliva and he rubbed it on the man's eyes. And he said, go and wash in the pool of Siloam, which, by the way, means the one who is sent. And so he went and he washed and he came back able to see. Well, the neighbors and some of the people who used to see him sitting and begging said, but isn't this the man who used to sit and beg? And some of them were saying, yeah, it's him. And others were saying, no, it just looks like him. But he was saying, I am he. And then they said, well, how do you see now? And he said, the man called Jesus, he made mud and he rubbed it on my eyes and he told me to go to the pool of Siloam and wash. And I went and I washed and I came back able to see. And they said, well, where is this Jesus? And he said, I don't know. So they take him to the Pharisees, the man formerly blind. Now, it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened the man's eyes. So the Pharisees are asking him, how is it that you can see? And he said, a man called Jesus put mud on my eyes and I washed and now I can see. And some of the Pharisees were saying, this Jesus cannot be from God because he does not keep the Sabbath. But others were saying, how can a sinner perform such signs? So there was a schism among them. So they asked the man, well, what do you say? It was your eyes he opened. And the man said, he's a prophet. Well, now, the religious authorities didn't believe that the man had been born blind and then received his sight until they called his parents. And they said, is this your son who you say is born blind? How does he see now? The parents said, oh, let's see, we know that this is our son, and we know he was born blind, but how he now sees, we don't know, and we especially don't know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of legal age. He'll talk for himself. Now, the parents said these things because the religious authorities had already decided that whoever confesses Jesus to be the Messiah would be expelled from the synagogue community. And so that's why they said, he is of legal age, ask him. So for a second time, the Pharisees called the man and said, give glory to God. By the way, give glory to God is a technical term. It's similar to an oath that you would swear to make sure you're telling the truth. Kind of like our "so help me God" that we used to say prior to testifying in court. Give glory to God. We know that this man, Jesus, is a sinner. And the man said, well, whether he is a sinner, I don't know. One thing I do know is that I was blind and now I can see. They said to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And he said, I've told you once already, but you wouldn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Wait a minute. You don't want to become his disciples, do you? Well, they hurled curses at him. And they said, you are this Jesus's disciple? We are disciples of Moses. We know God spoke through Moses. As for this Jesus, we don't know where he comes from. And the man said, well, here's the spectacle. You don't know where he comes from, but he opened my eyes. We know that God does not pay attention to the requests of sinful people, but for someone who is devout and who does the will of God, to that person, God listens. Now, never since the beginning of time has it been heard that someone opened the eyes of a person who was born blind. If Jesus were not from God, he could do nothing. They said, you were born entirely in sin, and you try to teach us? And they threw him out of the synagogue community. Just threw him away. Now, Jesus heard that they had thrown him out. And he came to him and said, do you believe? Do you trust in the Son of Man? And the man said, well, show me where he is, sir, so that I might trust. And Jesus said, you're looking at him, and he's the one speaking with you. And the man said, Lord, I trust. And he knelt down before him. And Jesus said, as a criterion of judgment, I came into this world with the result that those who are blind might see, and those who see might become blind. Now, some of the Pharisees were standing by, And they heard him saying this, and they said, well, we're not blind, surely, are we? And Jesus said, no. If you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty of your sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains. Well, where do I start with this passage? There's a lot in there. Before we start with anything, I want to call your attention, and I think it'll be up on the screen here, to two pieces of art, one by Rune Nielsen and the other by her sister Lisa Nielsen. Rune's piece of art is entitled Path of Learning. Lisa's piece of art is entitled Water of Life. Now, these are like perfectly titled for this message, because those really are the two things that I want to focus on. I want to talk about how life-changing this blind man's encounter with Jesus was. His life was not the same after that day that he met Jesus. And that all started with one simple act of obedience, where he went to the pool of Siloam and he washed his face. The pool of Siloam, by the way, was one of a number of pools where people would carry out ritual cleansing rites. Ritual cleansing was done before someone approached the divine to make like a sacrifice or to make petitions, for example. And you probably noticed that Jesus identifies himself as someone who was sent by God. And also, the narrator of this passage identifies the pool of Siloam with the meaning one who has been sent. That's no accident. Jesus as the sent one of God, and the pool of Siloam meaning sent, are both significant in the life of the man born blind. The man born blind encounters Jesus as one who has been sent to do God's works. One of those works was restoring his sight. And so he was sent to the pool of Siloam, which means sent, to wash. And there he encountered the divine. He received his sight. Sight's a really important word in the Gospel of John. And in this particular chapter, it has a number of significant pieces to it. One, obviously, the ability to see, but second, the ability to know. There's this interplay between sight and knowing that we see in the passage. The man was able to more and more clearly see or know who Jesus was. And it seems that the religious authorities had the inverse of that. They were unable progressively to understand, to see, to know who Jesus was, who Jesus is. Now, did you notice the we know passages here? There's a couple of times that the religious authorities say, we know this man is a sinner. We know that God spoke through Moses to us. As for this Jesus, we don't know where he's from, right? The man born blind, when he was being interrogated, they asked him, give glory to God, tell the truth. We know this man is a sinner. And the man answered, out of his own experience, no formal theological training like the religious authorities in this passage, out of his own experience, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, now I see. My experience of Jesus. And that's really all we can know, isn't it? Our experience of Jesus. I mean, sure, we can know things, we can be taught things, we can understand things, and I don't want to minimalize that. I've built my career on being a biblical scholar, so I have no small amount of formal training in this. But at the end of the day, really, all we have is our experience with the divine. The man's whole life changed that day. The moment he washed in Siloam. By the way, there's other places in the Gospel of John where Jesus identifies himself as the water of life. And indeed, Siloam was a life-giving experience for this man, because that's where he began his journey with Christ. And it wasn't easy. From the get-go, he was interrogated and he was cursed at and he was expelled from his community. And you might say, well, I mean, what real connection would a man who was a blind beggar have with his community? Well, actually, a quite significant one. In that time and in that culture, in that place, that geographical region, still kind of true today, people were not individualistic, is the sociological term for it. They were collectivistic, which means they saw themselves primarily as part of a collective or a group. In his case, and in his parents' case, the synagogue community. You notice a couple times the passage talks about being expelled from the synagogue community, and that would have been a big deal because your whole identity would have been wrapped up in being part of that community. And here we find the man born blind expelled from his community, thrown away, thrown out. But that wasn't the end of the story, was it? Jesus came to him, and Jesus brought him into a new community of believers. So I want you to ask yourself or think about these few questions here. What has Jesus done for you as an individual? What has Jesus done for us as a church community? How has Jesus brought life and sight? The blind man literally crossed over from one life to the next. As a matter of fact, another part of the Gospel of John talks about when someone believes, they cross over from death to life. That's what happened to the man born blind. How has Jesus brought life and sight to you? And finally, what are we afraid of? The parents in that story were terrified so terrified that they threw their only son under the bus. The blind man in that story, the formerly blind man in that story, found increasing courage to stick to what he knew, to stick to who he knew. Who he knew was Christ.